And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, with planet.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside FT off. Bring in FT off. It's orange!
45! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Look at this!
Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If the methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You good? We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, everyone. We are live for, unfortunately, not the doubleheader that SpaceX had planned, but just the Starlink Group 8-3 mission, but still exciting nonetheless. I see all the 5x5s in chat. Thank you very much for that. And I will be your host for today's mission. I'm Trevor Sesnick, a writer here at NSF. But thankfully, I am not alone. I am joined by the one and the only Alex. Alex, how you doing this morning? Well, I guess it's not really morning for you, is it?
Well, it's afternoon here. It's just that given all of my work that I do at NSF, I probably already have the Eastern time zone, on my brain coded, well coded in my brain. I remember, when I went to the US, I really didn't have any jet lag or anything. It was like, yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's nice to maybe today have more better probabilities of a launch rather than a scrub like yesterday. So we'll see. At the very least, sure, no double header, but let's get this launch ready, right? Like, come on.
Yeah, and able to tell us more about the weather here in a bit. We have D Wise from the field. D, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty well. It is bright and early out here. It is dewy, but we have a rocket on the pad, and I'm ready to see this thing go.
I think we all are. And then we also have Max Evans. Max, why did you cause the other Starlink to scrub or get delayed?
Is that really how is that really how we're starting this stream? Sheesh. But good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be out this morning. Not quite as early as yesterday, thankfully. But technically, D, we actually have 2 rockets on launch pads. Just one's not vertical. So.
Yeah. So with that, Alex, can you give us an overview of what we're expecting to see on today's Starlink Group 8-3 mission?
Yeah. So today, is SpaceX is launching the Starlink Group 8-3 mission, as you were mentioning, with 21 Starlink satellites. 13 of them are direct-to-cell satellites, and 8 of them are V2 mini satellites. So what that means is that, it's not a complete batch of direct-to-cell or V2 minis. It's actually a bit of a mix. That's what they've been doing for a while. However, in the past, it's been 7 V2 minis or this mission and the previous mission with DTCs with direct-to-cell satellites from Vandenberg. They also, were able to snuck in that extra satellite. I think it was like 9.4 for the Vandenberg launch. So yeah, they're up in their game here, trying to get more Starlink satellites up into orbit. As you can see, there are all the stats for today's launch: 79th launch of the year, 4th launch of the month, 7th Falcon launch since the last failure with the Starlink 9.3 mission. 360th overall flight for Falcon 9. This is the 199th launch from Sleek 40, so the next one will be the magic 200th. However, if you, instead of counting launches, you count missions, then this is the 200th mission, because Amos 6 was a mission, but it did not launch. The things that happen when you're trying to make stats is that you kind of have to have those nuances in differences. But yeah, other than that, 21 Starlink satellites going into a 53.16 degree inclination orbit. Going to the northeast, just as usual these days. They, remember that they did those southeast launches. Now they've changed to northeast launches. So if you are in the east coast, you're probably not gonna see a lot of stuff. But definitely try. I will try. You know, being me, but hey, definitely try. And that's essentially what we are going to see today. Obviously, the booster, as you can see in the ticker, 21 flights, B1067. There's going to be another launch later this weekend, which is going to be B1061 out of Vandenberg, which is going to be the 22nd booster. This weekend is essentially the weekend of the high flights of boosters, and there you can see all of the missions that this booster has accomplished already. CRS-22, Crew 3, Turksat, blah, 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 and then the booster turnaround time as well. I think that is the up to date number. Yes, it is. Okay, just trying to make sure. Looking at my
Yeah,
spreadsheets
it's
and
hard to
everything.
keep track of all the stats,
Yeah,
especially when these launches are moving around.
exactly. Because when they move T zeros and everything, it's like now the booster turnaround is not correct, and yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, and of course it is landing on just with instructions, and the fairings are being recovered by Bob.
Yeah, so D, yesterday, one of the big concerns was weather in the recovery area. Uh, do we know if that's any better today? And how is the weather at the launch site in general?
Well, the weather at the launch site is looking pretty good. There are a few clouds in the distance, and the only concern at the launch site listed in the weather forecast is the cumulus clouds rule, and I do not see any cumulus clouds around. Of course, yesterday the mission was scrubbed due to the downrange weather, and today that is all a low risk criteria. Those aren't factored into the percentage, but we just get either a range of low or moderate. And yesterday it was low to moderate. Today it's just low, as is the upper level wind shear and solar activity. So weather is really looking good for a launch today. The probability of violation does increase towards the end of the window. Of course, it gets up to a 30% chance of violation, but we are going pretty close to the start. So that should not be too much of a concern. We're at around a 10% chance of violation here.
Awesome. And then, yeah, tomorrow, the weather for the other Starlink mission, 10-7, seems to be 10% probability of violation. So hopefully that launch will go tomorrow as planned as well. But Max, do we have any indication as to why the double header is not happening? Why they had to move 10-7 from this morning to tomorrow morning?
At least visually, here from the launch site, the rocket is not vertical at 39A. And normally it would have to go vertical at a minimum from what we've timed before at around 3 hours before launch for both pad 40 and pad 39A. With it laying on its side, SpaceX has not said anything more than that they are targeting tomorrow for the Starlink 10-7 mission now. Really nothing else we can go off of other than it's just taking a nap on the base of the pad so far.
Yep, there it is on the
Mhm.
left. Definitely not going to reach that original, what was it, 9:03 a.m. local launch
Yeah.
time that they were going to have with just 13 minutes between launches. So that's
Sometimes
kind
it
of a
could be
bummer.
just Yeah. Sometimes it could be just as easy as, they did not have time to ready the Falcon 9 on time for today's window, and that's totally fine. Like, these things happen, right? So, like, sometimes the weather might be good, but then either the vehicle or the pad is going wonky, and you're like, "Oh my God, I need more time." And now, well, the time that I need kind of pushes our launch beyond the window, so we cannot attempt to launch today. And then they have to push it to push it to the next window, which is tomorrow.
Right. But an interesting conversation, I think, is this would have been 13 minutes between launches from the same coast. Do you think that this is something that the range was able to support, or were these just T-zeros that SpaceX was like, ideally, we want to launch these missions at these two times, but if one goes, then we'll add a little bit more room uh, between missions, chooses different T0 for the other. Is this a capability that the 45th and SpaceX really have, do you guys think? Let's start with you, Alex.
Um, I thought at least yesterday when we were live for this first attempt for this mission for A3, I really had recalled like there was a point perhaps a couple of years ago where the range had said that the limit was like 30 minutes or so, but perhaps nowadays it's even less than that because they obviously work to improve their systems and everything. So right now maybe those 13 minutes could have been realized. I really have no idea though. It would be great to actually, see SpaceX one day actually being successful at trying that out and prove that they can do that. From a SpaceX side of things, we know that, they can do a lot of operations in a very short period of time, and they have multiple launch control centers, rooms rather. Although it is true that they have multiple launch control centers, they also have multiple launch control rooms, and also they have a mission control center in Hawthorne with multiple mission control rooms, so they can, they can run multiple missions at once. Of course, some missions like crew missions, for example, well, sometimes they take more resources and they want to, keep more people focused on that mission rather than, having to be sharing focus with other missions and whatnot. But for these Starlink missions, I could see that. Yeah, why not? I just hope that that eventually happens at one point.
Yeah, I certainly think we all do, and I especially imagine D and Max would have rather slept in tomorrow and had a double header today.
Yeah, that would have been nice, but I'll be out here tomorrow. Uh, Always good to have a launch. Cannot complain that it happens on two separate days, but yeah, once we finally get a double header that close together, that will be incredible to see. We'll have to keep track of two different timelines, two different sets of 20-minute vents. Like, that'll be interesting. I can't imagine the challenges within SpaceX and within the range.
Yeah, it really kind of raises the question, at least to me, of how many people are actually involved on SpaceX's side. Once the rocket is vertical and they've cleared the pad for fueling operations, how much actual human input is needed? Or is the launch team just so small for these Starlink missions that having two in a row is somewhat trivial? But unfortunately, I don't think we have a good answer to that question. Um, anyway, just as a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions for us, make sure you tag us in chat with that at NASA Spaceflight, and we will happily answer your guys' questions. But for that, I see a bunch of support has come in a little bit from yesterday. Chris became a PadRad member. Ironclad became a Capcom member. Dan became a PadRad member, as did Chip. Ander became a Red Team member. Jonathan became a PadRad member. And then Musical Wolves with a $5 super chat saying this must be a record for closest time between launches. Yes, it would have been if the doubleheader would have held, but obviously now that a launch got pushed to tomorrow, it will no longer be a record. The current record is 1 hour and 56 minutes, if I remember correctly, between two SpaceX launches. And then Musical Wolves with another super chat saying, given how close the two launch windows are, anyone else think of the double shuttle launch from Armageddon? I don't get that reference, but hopefully someone else here does.
I would love
Um,
to give you a hard time about not knowing that reference, Trevor,
Mm.
but I too have also not seen Armageddon, so I can't really say anything.
yeah. Then Jelly Bean became a PadRad member, and Eagle became a Red Team member. So welcome everyone to the membership program. Hope you guys enjoy all of the perks. Anyway, we are coming up on the poll for fuel load. So Max, could you walk us through when that poll is, and then if they poll go, when we'll expect to start seeing vents from the vehicle?
Absolutely. So the launch director will verify that they are go for prop load at about T minus 38 minutes, which is not too far from where we are now. A whole bunch of factors play into that, and variables also as well. And if they do elect that they are go for prop load, RP1 loading will begin at around T minus 35 minutes, followed by first stage liquid oxygen loading also at 35 minutes. And we should see indications of prop load at the bottom of the LOX tank from our perspective, around, I want to say, around T minus 33 to 31 minutes. They obviously Falcon 9 with the load and go fueling procedures obviously fuels very, very quickly, and it doesn't take long to see some indications that prop load is underway. Followed after that, we have, of course, the famous T minus 20-minute vent, which is where they purge and cleanse the propellant lines in the transporter erector to prepare them and condition them for stage 2 liquid oxygen loading. After that, they will go into first stage Merlin engine chill at around T minus 7 minutes, also to condition the prop lines in the engines, because the last thing you want to have is temperature flashing in the plumbing of your engines, causing flash steaming and causing a whole bunch of issues and having a bad day for everybody else involved. And of course, after that, they will Falcon 9 will go into startup at T minus 1 minute, and that is also when the prop tanks are at full pressurization for flight pressures. And then, of course, after that, the LD will verify that they are go for launch at around T minus 35 seconds, 40 seconds, somewhere around there. And assuming that goes well, we should see a Falcon 9 getting off the pad here very soon.
Excellent. That is what we want to hear. And in case they do adjust the T0 a little bit more, they have additional opportunities and available up until 10:48 a.m. local. So they have about 2 more hours, almost exactly, in the window that they can adjust the T0 if need be. But let's just all cross our fingers and hope that they don't end up utilizing those. And as Dee was telling us earlier, the weather does get slightly worse as the window goes on, going from a 10% probability violation to 30 at the end of the window.
I feel like even mentioning the full window for these Starlinks just jinxes us completely.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
So if it delays past what it is now, Trevor, we all know who to blame.
Yep. You can blame me, and I'll be annoyed at myself since it'll be longer until I can go to bed. Anyway, going to some of your guys' questions. Here's an interesting one from Orion Space that I'll give to you, Alex. Will Falcon be involved in Project Kuiper at all?
Well, surprisingly, yes. They got 3 launches from Amazon. I think it's mostly so that, certain investors just shut up and don't complain, because they complained that Amazon only gave launches to, Blue Origin, Arianespace, and ULA on rockets that have not launched yet, or have launched only once, which is, for example, Ariane 6 and Vulcan. And in the case of Blue Origin, sure, they have New Glenn coming up, but, it's still a bit of a few months, from its first launch. And it's not like it's going to be launching Kuiper satellites on the first launch. They need to build up cadence. Both, all 3 rockets, Blue Origin's New Glenn, Vulcan, and Ariane 6, all of them need to build that cadence. And so they complained, and then a few weeks later, Amazon came up with like, "Hey, hi, we're giving SpaceX 3 launches." So I don't know. But that's the involvement that they are in Kuiper. Other than that, there's not really a lot more, to be fair.
Yeah, I think it was Eric Berger who described when the Kuiper Awards went out to ULA, Arianespace, and Blue Origin. Berger described it as the everyone but SpaceX package. And then I think a lot of the institutional Amazon investors got kind of annoyed with that and decided to sue uh, Amazon for not properly considering SpaceX in the competition, which they are arguing is not in the best interest of the company. So it'll be interesting if anything comes out of that. But given it's a massive lawsuit between massive entities, I'm sure we'll learn what the outcome is in like half a decade. Um, let's see. Here's another question from um, Orion Space. Is Falcon 9 Stage 2 ever going to be reusable since Falcon 9 isn't fully reusable as it is? D, does SpaceX have any plans to try to recover the second stage on Falcon missions ever?
At this point, no, they're going all in for full reusability on Starship rather than trying to implement more reusability on a rocket that initially, while designed with reusability in mind, it started out expendable. So rather than putting in all the effort and systems uh, to recover that second stage, they're just minimizing their costs as much as they can, and they'll get full reusability when Starship is flying fully.
It is worth noting, however, that at one point they were considering the idea of, as Elon put it, a bouncy house for stage 2, but obviously that never materialized.
I kind of wish it would have. That would have been.
Honestly,
I don't
same.
think it would.
That would have been pretty rad.
I don't think it would have been the most practical form of recovery ever, but it would have been cool. And then I think, based on the graphics that Carson, our live stream operator, is showing, I suspect we forgot to talk about launch direction. Max, what is this graphic that we're looking at right now for, and what direction in general is the launch going to be headed on today's mission?
The graphic on screen looks to be the re-entry zone for the stage 2 after it is finished deploying all the Starlink satellites from today's mission. I think Alex mentioned it in the intro, but I'm happy to go over it again. Falcon 9 is heading off on a 53.16 degree orbital inclination for today's mission. And for those who don't exactly know what that is essentially that is heading northeast from the Florida coast. And that orange zone you see down there, also on your screen, is basically the keep out zone for the drone ship and the supporting vessels that go with recovering the first stage. So basically, TLDR is it's heading northeast today.
Yeah, so if you guys, I guess it's kind of probably a bit too bright at this point to see it if you're too far up north in the United States, like Charleston or whatever. But if for this mission profile at night, my understanding is if it's clear out, you can get a very good view up the entire United States coast, which is always cool to see photos from that. Um, let's see, going to some more of your guys' questions as we are about to cross the T-minus 35-minute mark, which is when propellant load should begin if SpaceX is still go for that 8:50 a.m. local launch time. Um, let's see, any launches
Oh, we
maybe at
have an
night?
update from SpaceX.
Oh,
All systems are looking
Good
good.
news.
Weather is 95% favorable, and propellant load is about to begin for today's launch.
Great news.
that is exactly what we wanted to hear.
That's the
There's
update
that
there.
X post from SpaceX themselves. Cool. So that means that propellant load is now underway on Falcon 9, and In the next few minutes, we should start to be able to see signs of that on the liquid oxygen tank. So kind of roughly a third of the way up the vehicle, we'll start to see this little white band cover the really, really sooty booster. Um, first time. Anyway, back to some of your guys' questions. Toby's saying SpaceX should outfit Slick 40 to support Falcon Heavy. Then they can do simultaneous heavy RTLS launches, and we can see 4 boosters landing at once. I for s- I think that would be awesome, but I for some reason don't think that will ever happen. Um, SpaceX doesn't really need an additional Falcon Heavy pad from the East Coast. And here's a interesting question, not about Falcon, from Soul24. He's wondering, considering that there is a limited launch window to Mars, do you think the inaugural New Glenn launch will happen? And is the NASA Escapade mission a bit ambitious for the first launch? D, what are your thoughts about the first New Glenn mission possibly being a deep space mission?
Oh, I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about this. I think it's incredible. It shows the confidence that Blue at least has in their systems to put something like that so early for their rocket. Like, we're used to seeing, with SpaceX at least, just testing and testing in the public eye. And it's a totally different uh, way to develop a launch vehicle. And so we saw it with Vulcan, like going for a lunar lander on their first mission of Vulcan. And so it really demonstrates the different ways that SpaceX works compared to the rest of the industry, I think.
Yeah, SpaceX is certainly way more willing to take um, risk on their early launches and just intentionally don't have payloads because of that. But it's been very cool about how much New Glenn hardware we've been seeing. I think Max and D the other day shot at the port them testing the breakover fixture of New Glenn, which will be used to take the New Glenn stages from vertical to horizontal. You can see that blue structure is the breakover, and then the massive New Glenn booster laid down. I believe New Glenn's first stage is like 58 meters
Yep.
tall and 7 meters in diameter. Um, so it's enormous when you compare it to Falcon. And then we've seen, of course, Blue Origin has been posting on X all of the videos of like landing leg testing and thruster testing and fin testing. So New Glenn, I feel like surely we're getting pretty close to them rolling out a complete booster with engines for a static fire, which will be just extraordinarily exciting to see.
Yeah. They already rolled the second stage for the first flight, so wouldn't be surprising to see the booster next.
Yeah. It's I've been absolutely loving the new Blue Origin CEO posting as much as they are on X, uh, giving us some cool behind the scenes testing and whatnot that New Glenn has been doing. I think it's something that Blue's needed to do for a long time.
Yeah, that is always great.
Yeah. Here's a interesting question, I think probably for you, Alex. Does Falcon 9 also have Mach diamonds as wide as its booster? And if not, what is the difference between how those on
Hmm.
Starship and why not on Falcon?
I'm guessing they refer to like the Mega Mac diamonds, the ones that come up when, all of the Mac diamonds on the individual engines. Because the individual engines on the Merlin, so the Merlin does have Mac diamonds when you see those engine shots from either our wonderful photographers that we have here, like D and Max, or you see it on official pictures from SpaceX or other amazing photographers out there. um they individual engines, they do have the the Mac diamonds, but they do not combine. And I'm mostly sure they do not combine because of how Merlin works. It's lower pressure of the exhaust, lower velocities and everything. Like, it's a different engine, right? So when you combine all of those engines, you don't get that same effect. Also, I'm mostly sure, perhaps because there's like 33 Raptors rather than like right on Super Heavy, whereas on Falcon 9 there are only 9. And so it's probably harder to get that sort of combined Mega Mac Diamond effect with, it's a bunch of engines, but it's probably not enough to get that effect. And you probably get that effect when you get a lot more of them. And that's essentially what you get underneath. It's funny because I remember very early on from the development of Starship, I remember there was a point, I think it was Tim Dodd who asked Elon, well before we saw any boosters, well before we saw any starships, whether there be like some kind of aerospike effect, because Tim is like super into aerospikes and whatnot. So if there would have been some kind of aerospike effect, because there's so many engines, right? And a lot of the aerospikes are essentially like little engines around some kind of cone or some kind of like for linear ones, it's like more like a you know what I mean, right? It's a bunch of combustion chambers. So what you get is that same effect of all of these exhausts just combining together. And so that's probably what we saw with Super Heavy in the case of Falcon 9. Apart from being a different engine, perhaps there's not enough engines to be able to produce that sort of big Mega Mike Diamond effect.
I think it's also worth noting that just with in the nature of Merlin or any other Keralox engine in general, I think it's just a lot more difficult to see any Mach Diamond effects in the exhaust, simply because the exhaust is so bright due to the combustion of the RP1 and the LOX compared to, say, hydrogen or methane, which are basically almost translucent. And methane works really well because it's not as dim as hydrogen, but it's nowhere near as bright as an RP1 Keralox mixture. So you get these really pronounced, really, really bright hot spots where the exhaust all culminates in with the Mach Diamonds. Whereas Falcon 9, yes, you do have that to an extent within all 9 engines, but you have to expose your imagery very, very, very carefully to see any of that effect at all, simply because of how bright the exhaust is. So it is there. It's just a lot more difficult to see.
Yeah.
What is not difficult to see is the frost forming on the booster. We can see from all of the condensation that's kind of around the lower bit of the liquid oxygen tank that they are indeed into liquid oxygen load, which is just what we want to hear. And we are just 6 minutes away from that T-minus 20 minute and 20-second vent. So, very exciting nonetheless. Let's see, here's a question. When will Starlink reach 10,000 satellites? So, Alex, how many active Starlink satellites are there?
I will have to look it up because I don't have these things on a spreadsheet. That's why Jonathan McDowell has his own website for it. Right now there are in orbit 6,313 satellites. So over 6,000 satellites in orbit. Of them, there are about 5,800 operational. The other 500 are still doing all their essentially they are either after their lives or something like that, and they're coming back down, or they are, the great majority of them though, they are in orbit functional, and then they are just just going into their operational orbit. As for how long until we get to 10,000 though, I will say perhaps 2 years. That's my take. I think 2 years, because at around 20 per launch, right? You pretty much need, let's see, you pretty much need 50 launches of Starlink satellites. And this year they want to launch about 100 Starlink launches, and the other 40 something will be customer launches. And next year they want to up that to 200. So I can imagine maybe 150 Starlink satellites, satellite launches. So that's probably like 3,000 satellites next year, plus 1,000 remaining maybe in this year. That's 4,000 plus the 6,000 already in orbit. So maybe 2 years, year and a half, probably to get to 10,000 satellites in orbit.
Yeah,
That's my take on it.
the launch rate definitely, right, since they have gone from launching 60 satellites per launch to now in the 20s, um, the total numbers going up at kind of roughly the same rate due to launch cadence increase, but it definitely feels a little bit slower. Um, but when you look at it in terms of bandwidth, the bandwidth that they're sending up is actually way, way higher than it used to be, just
Yeah.
because of, right, each Starlink V2 satellite is well more than 3 times as capable and has more than 3 times the bandwidth, despite having only, what, roughly 3 times-ish the mass or so.
Hmm. That is exactly what SpaceX said at one point, that despite them having the mini on the name, they're gigantic and they have a lot more. Like I think it is over 4 times more performance than the V2 V1.5 satellites that they were launching before, where they were launching like 50 something, 60 of them at a time. So that is essentially what um, yeah, what I will expect. Someone saying, Alex, unless they start launching on Starship, guess what? Starship will carry about the same number, just because of how many they can fit in the pest dispenser. So it's not going to change the numbers a lot. And also, I don't expect Starship to launch a lot of times to really make a difference in the next year or so. I'm sorry, I just don't see that.
Yeah, especially since they're
Yeah.
just focusing on reuse at the current time.
Yeah, reuse, and then they're gonna be doing, all the refueling stuff for Artemis, and Starlink in some sense, it's probably gonna be, you know, next year when they're gonna be launching Starlink satellites on Starship, but I don't think it's gonna be right front and center, or at least not for a while. And they also need to build the cadence as well. So, they're still low on the cadence to even be able to replace Falcon 9 at all.
Right. Um, but with that, we are just about a minute away from the T minus 20-minute vent. D, what is this vent and why do we always talk about it and why does it symbolize good things?
Yeah, so before they can load propellant into the second stage, they want to cool down all of the lines because there would be a lot of thermal shock. Otherwise, they'd be vaporizing a lot of the propellant. So the T minus 20-minute vent is when they start cooling down those lines, and the uh, cool gases meeting with the hot, humid Florida air causes a lot of condensation. And depending on what the wind is like, we'll see a smaller cloud, or it can be a massive cloud of vapor coming from the rocket. So basically, seeing that means that they're going to be moving ahead into loading the second stage. So it just means that things are moving well in the count.
Yeah, and always what we want to see, that launch is still on track for uh, launch in just over 20 minutes. So it should be starting. It's exactly at pad 40 at T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. And I believe Slick 4 East is also T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. And then 39A is slightly different.
There she
Yep.
blows.
And there it is, right on time. Awesome. Very good sign. Just like this very generous support we're getting right now. First was a $25 super chat from Bideford saying, "Heading out the door to show houses when I'm missing my favorite love SpaceX launches. Thank you, NSF." No, thank you, Bideford. Thank you for always being around and being such a loyal supporter of the channel. We really, really appreciate you. And then Jerwa with a $50 super chat just saying hi. Hello, Jerwa.
It feels like a lot of money for just saying hi. Kind of,
Hello.
yeah. Hello.
Hello.
It's
Then, as if
yeah,
as if that
makes me
super
feel
chat wasn't
bad.
enough, he then gifted 20 red team memberships.
Wow.
Jerwa, seriously, thank you very much. That is very generous. And if you got one of those gifted memberships, make sure you tag Jerwa in chat just saying thank you, and then go check out all of the awesome member perks that you get. And then Joe gifted another 5 red team memberships. So that's a lot of new members. Hopefully, you guys enjoy all the content. I know all the photographers work very hard to bring as much content to the members as possible. Um, then Orion Space with another question wondering, is there any Falcon Heavy Starlink launch planned and why? Max, do you ever think that SpaceX will do a Falcon Heavy launch just for Starlink?
That is certainly an interesting thought. I'm not gonna lie. But I don't think there are any in or I don't think there's any Starlink missions planned for Falcon Heavy at the moment. I think if there ever was going to be a need for a payload as big or heavy to require Falcon Heavy for Starlink, I think that mission would have to be referred over to Starship at some point, even though they are currently only being built to deploy the full size V2s. They could be reconfigured to deploy the V2 minis at some point, maybe, if those are still around, assuming the full size V2s haven't taken over yet. But at the moment, I don't believe so. But that is a very interesting concept to think about.
Yeah, I certainly doubt it will ever happen. It seems like way more work. Like you wouldn't really get that much of a you would what maybe double or a little over double the amount of satellites you can place in orbit, and then for
I
that
mean,
you're
they could
risking
always
3
try to fly at some point when the big extended fairing is going to be ready for Falcon Heavy. They could always shove like 40 to 50 or 60 V2 minis in that fairing on a Falcon Heavy and try to fly it. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
then now
I
you're
was just
getting
gonna say. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead, D.
You also have to think about, like, would that then be a dual RTLS and a booster landing? Because they use these Starlink missions a lot of time to push the boundaries of the reusability. And so there's then the added cost of, if even if they do like double drone ship landings or something, then they're expending a center core, and that's a lot of additional cost and more work that has to go into each mission. Whereas if they can just launch it with a Falcon 9 and reuse it, they're really keeping their costs down. So even if it means they're sending up less satellites, if they can send up those satellites more often without expending the first stage, their costs could be lower, even if it takes a couple extra launches.
Yeah. And also, right, keep in mind the extended payload fairing is not going to be recoverable. So they're just going to expend those larger fairing halves. So that would also increase cost. And then just in general, since Falcon Heavy really takes its toll on 39A, you would just have substantially more refurbishment and whatnot between launches, further just adding to the cost. So I think it definitely makes sense to just keep it on Falcon 9 for now, and then move it to move Starship launches to Starship as Starship becomes operational.
Yeah, and also, on the same lines of what you just said, Falcon Heavy, it takes like 2 or 3 weeks to prepare for flight. They can do, I don't know, like 5 or 6 Starlink missions in the same time, right? So they can launch a lot more on multiple Falcon 9 missions rather than just one single Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy, something like that, right? So, yeah.
Right. Um, but it looks like the T minus 20-minute vent has stopped, which means that second stage should be into liquid oxygen load, which is what we always want to see. Let's see. Appy and Vicky is wondering when will the next Falcon Heavy fly? I believe the next one is it Europa Clipper on October 10th?
I believe so. Yes.
Yep. That'll be a fully expendable Falcon Heavy. Well, I guess maybe the fairings are going to be recovered, but you know what I mean by fully expendable.
It's a real shame, I think, because I think it's the only. There's only 2 Falcon Heavy missions slated for this year, and whereas last year I think we had like what 4 or 5. It's
Yeah.
a real. It feels like a real downgrade, but you know it is what it is.
There's more Falcon Heavy launches anyways next year and the following ones. I'm really looking forward to, for example, there's another mission on Falcon Heavy, which is the Roman Space Telescope. It's going to be launching on Falcon Heavy. I really cannot wait for that, because that's going to be an awesome telescope.
Yeah. And I mean, from a launch cadence perspective, fewer Falcon Heavy missions is definitely good, since like as Alex was saying, it takes 2-3 weeks on either end of the launch to convert the pad from Falcon 9 to Falcon Heavy configuration. So, if they want to reach their 148 launch goal, which I sadly think is very unlikely at this point, they kind of have to reach, 15 launches per month for the rest of the year. And when you have a pad that's down for over a month, that's not what you want for the launch cadence SpaceX is targeting. Here's a good question from Dave. How long does it take a Starlink satellite to deorbit after it's completed its useful life? This seems like an Alex question for sure.
Yeah, so normally this is a very big usual misconception when talking about getting rid of Starlink satellites, where some people think, oh, they target a specific point in the ocean or something like that. Nothing further from the truth, right? It's like it's actually random. So the way that these satellites are deorbited when they are at their end of the life, or if they find some kind of issue with the satellites, what they do is they lower their orbit so that they don't stay in high orbits, essentially, especially if they're still maneuverable, like if they can fire their thruster and maneuver in space. What they do is they just fire that thruster to lower their orbit, but because that thruster is very, very low thrust, they cannot do a precise deorbit burn. So when you try to deorbit from to just be able to come from orbit and re-enter the atmosphere, you really need a very precise and rather short burn, because if you keep burning just like these satellites do, it's very low thrust. You will have to burn for a long time to be able to do the whole deorbit burn, and by the time you do that, your orbit is continually being lowered, and well, you eventually actually don't land on a very precise, like your ground track for a potential deorbit becomes your entire orbit, essentially, right? So what they do is they just lower their orbits to an orbit that does not affect other satellites, say something like 250 kilometers or something like that, where essentially any satellites that are orbiting at that point, they're not doing anything really interesting, because that's not usually the orbits at the orbital altitude for most of the satellites. Most of the satellites are way higher than that. So they avoid being space junk, essentially, by lowering their orbits, and then atmospheric drag does the rest of the work by essentially completely lowering the satellite's orbit. So it usually takes about a couple of weeks to do that, that lowering of the orbit, and then the atmospheric drag takes another few more weeks as well. So say maybe a couple of months. Now, what happens though is that why is it then that nobody's worried about Starlink satellites randomly coming through the atmosphere at any point within 53 degree north and 53 degree south? Well, it's because the SpaceX designed the Starlink satellites to be fully demisable. So what they do is when they re-enter, they fully break up. There's no remains, and in fact, it is a testament to this, to this, and proof of this, that nobody has complained of any, debris of Starlink re-entries crashing or anything like it. And they have re-entered over populated areas, over the ocean, over many different places. Because again, it comes up in random places underneath of the orbit's track. So essentially, it is not something that should worry people because they are fully demisable. So that is the whole point.
Yeah, and this is just one example, I think, of SpaceX being very responsible with this constellation, right? When you have 6,000 active satellites in orbit, there's a lot of things you need to take into account. And one thing that the Starlink team actually just announced yesterday was they're working together with the NRAO, the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, to make it so that Starlink avoids transmitting into the line of sight of some of these radio telescopes. And the way that SpaceX is able to do this is, right, each satellite has this phased array antenna on it. And this phased array antenna means that they can steer the beam without actually having to move anything on the satellite. So they're looking at, where is this clear zone where they're trying to make measurements with these satellites, and then just don't broadcast there, which definitely is a good thing. And this is just, like I was alluding to, one of many things that SpaceX has done to try to minimize Starlink's impact. The others being, right, they've tried to significantly reduce the uh, luminance of the satellites, especially during orbital rays, so they're less bright in the sky. And then also they publish all of their satellite locations and whatnot, so that they can be edited out of any photos from ground-based observatories if they are uh, caught or whatever. So definitely
Yeah.
good to see, and I really hope, and if I'm being honest, I'm not super optimistic that all of the other
Mm.
large internet constellations do similar things, but we'll have to see.
And other countries as well with their own large constellations, namely, we all think about China, right? Especially in the last few days, what happened with the Long March 6A.
Yep, that was very much not good. Um, let's see. Yeah, we actually have a question about that. Gareth is asking, how significant is the threat to Starlink from the Chinese stage 2 RUD debris? Um, right now it's fairly minimal, but as that starts to lower, I think it'll be more and more major, correct, Alex?
Yeah, right now the average altitude of those debris are around 300 kilometers above the Starlink orbits. Some of them are probably going to get closer because, again, when you have an explosion in orbit, some chunks go to a higher orbit, some chunks go to a lower orbit. So that's one of the things that probably, the Starlink teams are looking at, where they're like, ooh, is there going to be any of these coming close to us? But other than that, the great majority of them are either going to be sort of in the middle or towards the top of, in higher orbits, but they're all going to be coming down at one point, and they're going to be coming down in the next following years, decades, most likely. And so not just Starlink, but future low Earth orbit constellations are going to be affected by this, and everybody, like even Hubble, for example, or the ISS, even the Chinese owned space station is going to be, affected by this. Like, this is just, shooting at your own foot, essentially.
Yeah, it's it's a shame that that happened, but at least it's an accident, unlike some of the ASAT tests that have occurred. That's just like, this seems like the stupidest possible thing that humanity could be doing is intentionally destroying satellites in orbit, yet we're doing it anyway. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, um, moving on. Um, Let's see. Looking for some of you guys' questions. Ellie is wondering what rocket will Nancy Grace Roman telescope be launched on? I believe Alex just mentioned that that will be
Yep.
Falcon Heavy.
Yep.
Um,
Falcon Heavy.
yeah. Let's see. Here's one last one for you, Max, before you guys have to head off. When do you think will Starship will launch from Florida, and will it be Ship 31 and Booster 13?
It will certainly not be Ship 31 and Booster 13. I would imagine that they get into more serious testing and construction probably mid to late next year, because they still, of course, have a lot of work to do over at Slick 37 once the lease is up with ULA. But in terms of an actual launch, I would probably say net 2026 at some point, and I think Starbase is going to remain a serious R&D facility and launch site, and I think that they will only start launching from here once Starship is either very close to or at commercially operational. So I think we're still a bit out.
Yeah, but I don't think we're out from you and D needing to get ready to do some tracking. So, D, Max, enjoy the launch and see you on the other side.
See you on the other side.
See y'all on the other side.
But with this, we are under 4 minutes away from launch, so we'll now have uh, a quick series of events occur in these next 3 minutes. Alex, can you walk us through what these events are and what we'll hopefully see?
Yeah, so right now, propellant load is wrapping up on both the first and second stages. Both RP1 tanks on both stages are already completely full. The stromback has retracted. It is already 1.8 degrees away from the vertical position. And essentially, the first stage LUX load should have wrapped up around this time. I just heard the call out.
is complete.
There you go. That's the call out. Stage 1 LUX load is complete, so the first stage is now fully loaded with propellants. There's still about a minute more, a bit under 1 minute to go for the second stage to be fully loaded with liquid oxygen. Once that wraps up, the Falcon 9 will be loaded with, I think it's over more than 1 million pounds of propellants. So that's a lot of, explodey stuff on board Falcon 9. But yeah, so once that wraps up, we're going to see the return of the T event as they clear out the lines so that, there's no more explodey stuff inside of them for liftoff, so that they can clear all of that ahead of that liftoff. Then at T-minus 1 minute, the ground computers will transition the countdown duties essentially to the onboard computers on Falcon 9. The tanks will pressurize for flight. Everything will be checked out ahead of that liftoff in 1 minute and 50 seconds.
Stage 2 LUX load is complete.
Stage 2 LUX load is complete, so Falcon 9 is now fully loaded. All 4 tanks are fully loaded with propellants. And there's the T event coming back. And so, yeah, hopefully in about a minute or so, we're going to get that go for launch from the launch director and a launch in a few more seconds afterward.
Yes.
Gas launch closeouts has started.
That's part of the closeouts.
Yep, and as Alex was mentioning, in 10 seconds we'll hear the call out that Falcon 9 has entered startup and that the tanks are pressurized for flight. Any second now we should get confirmation.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
There it is.
Nice.
So now Falcon 9 has taken control of its countdown from the ground-based computers onto the computers on board, and now any second we should be getting that. There it
Go
is.
for launch.
LD is go for launch. So at this point, just pay attention to the base of the vehicle. We don't have this view doesn't give us we won't be able to see the T-tab flash from this view. However, we'll start to see that big once ignition has started, all of the smoke
Vapors.
and steam and vapors coming from the base of the vehicle. Any second now we should start to see that. There it is, and there is liftoff of the Starlink 8-3 mission. We will remain quiet so you guys can enjoy the launch audio. And there we have it, a successful liftoff of Starlink 8-3, and we got that beautiful vapor cone as it passed through those transonic regions. Coming up, we'll have the usual quick series of events, starting with main engine cutoff, which is when all 9 of those engines you can see on your screen will shut down. Shortly after, the 2 stages will separate. There are 4 pusher systems between the 2, 3 radially around the booster, and then that 1 in the center that will separate the 2 stages before the second stage engine will ignite. We're expecting that to happen here very shortly in about 10 seconds.
It's Miko. And looks like MVAC ignition.
So you like
Now
seeing,
replay from
here's it from
SpaceX.
SpaceX. There's that central pusher I was talking about, and you can kind of see the 3 radial ones. And no ring stiffener, as is customary now on these SpaceX missions. I don't think any mission at this point has the ring stiffener, correct?
Yeah, I haven't seen it back on any recent missions.
Yeah. So Alex,
There comes the fairing step.
Yep. Those 2 fairings will splash down in the ocean about 45 minutes after launch, and they will be recovered by SpaceX's recovery vessel, Bob. But Alex, can you walk us through the events that both of these stages will be going through in the next 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, so right now the booster is coasting, and it's essentially right now in space. You can see there the altitude, 108 kilometers, and it's gonna go up to about 115, 117 kilometers or so in around 40 seconds or so. That's gonna be when it reaches apogee. Meanwhile, the second stage will continue with that MVAC burn until I think 8.5 minutes or so. It's usually when it burns. Meanwhile, while it's burning, second stage, the first stage will continue in that sort of quasi parabolic trajectory, and it's gonna reach apogee. It's about to right now. Then it's gonna be coming down, and it's gonna perform an entry burn at usually around 6.5 minutes or so after flight, and that's gonna be a 1-3-1 entry burn. It's gonna ignite the center engine, then 2 outer engines. Those 3 engines are gonna be firing for about 20 seconds or so, and then the 2 outer engines will shut down again, and then the center engine will be running just for a few more seconds until it shuts down. Then for the landing burn, so after that, it's going to use its grid fins to be able to steer itself towards the drone ship, getting through the thickest parts of the atmosphere, and essentially getting ready for that landing. That landing burn will occur about 2 kilometers above the deck of the drone ship, getting just 1 engine, the center engine, lit up for that landing burn should be around 25 to 30 seconds long. That should be the 21st landing of this booster, because it has already done 21 launches. This was the 21st launch. About to do the 21st landing.
Third booster to reach 21 launches alongside 61 and 62. And then 61 is actually this weekend is going to hit 22 flights.
Yeah,
So
it's about to do that. Yeah, really
yeah, then
exciting to see more 22 flights on boosters.
Yeah, then we're also probably coming up on 62 reaching its 23rd flight. It's about that time, probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll see that.
Yep.
Anyway, at this point, keep an eye out on the bottom left. That's the stage 1 telemetry. And we'll be able to see in the stage 1 telemetry when the entry burn has begun. As Alex was saying, that's the 131 configuration. And we'll start seeing the speed rapidly drop. It'll come up any moment now. And there it is. There's that single engine. And then we'll see, yep, there it expands to the line. So that is all 3 engines up and running for this entry burn, just as we wanted to see. And there's back to 1 and shutdown. That looked like a good entry burn. Max, I think we have you back. How was launch?
I have to be completely honest with you. This light, at least from our perspective, was kind of ugly. But beautiful as always seeing Falcon 9 get off the ground, and a beautiful vapor cone as well on ascent. We're just coming up on a landing burn here very soon, it looks like, and hopefully we will get some landing audio.
This one is just with the instructions, though, so probably not.
Oh yeah, probably not then. Okay, but yeah, otherwise it's beautiful.
Oh, look at that! Look how it's trying to steer.
Gridfin's doing
It's always
work.
so cool. If you tilt your head 90 degrees, you'll see how of an angle of attack it
Stage 1
reaches.
transonic.
It's crazy.
Yeah. There's that transonic callout. Again, keep an eye out on the bottom left, and you'll see entry burn, the speed decelerating from the entry burn there before landing burn. Thank you. Before a landing burn on the actual video.
Ah, the grid fin. That was so cool. Look at that. You can still see some of that vapor around the grid fin.
Stage 1 landing burn.
There it goes.
Ooh, there's the drone ship.
Stage 2 in terminal guidance.
Looks like the lens has cracked on the booster camera.
Stage 1 landing leg deployed.
Yeah.
And
There
landed.
it
Stage 1
is.
landing confirmed.
Stage 2
Nailed that
FTS
landing
is saved.
confirmation. That is the 21st landing for this booster, 336th total landing, and 262nd landing in a row. That is crazy.
MVAC shutdown.
And there is MVAC shutdown, and hopefully we'll be getting confirmation of nominal orbital insertion momentarily.
Or maybe not. Looks like not.
Or
But
they-
the numbers look good. I'm looking at the speed and altitude numbers there on the bottom right, and they look normal for this type of mission. So it should be good.
And there we have an empty launch pad with the TE horizontal. That should... Actually, is the TE going back up already slowly?
Yeah, you can just see it poking through on some of the shrubbery. The TE is already coming back up.
Yeah. Preparing for its next mission. Wow. That was... I can't get over that vapor cone during launch. That was insane.
That was a real treat, and the atmospheric conditions have to be just right. So when Falcon 9 begins to go transonic and pushes through, to supersonic speeds, that vapor cone becomes more and more clear and obvious, and sometimes very, very vibrant and energetic. And today certainly did not disappoint. It stuck around pretty for a pretty good amount of time. But beautiful as always.
Right. D, are we gonna get some of your signature slow motion footage of that?
It is exporting right now. So,
Oh, boy.
yes, we will. Like Max said, the lighting, but before launch, I wasn't too excited, honestly, with the backlighting, pretty harsh and pretty much everything in silhouette. But it worked out all right. I did something a little bit different this launch, so you'll see that, I guess, when we play it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we'll have lots of replays, so make sure you stick around to see more of that vapor cone goodness. Um, all right, I think we are ready for some of the replays. Carson, let's see him. Is this... I think this is Max's cam.
This actually looks to be D's.
D's? Okay.
But this is not the
All right.
slow-mo, though. Even though
Yeah.
Falcon 9 kind of looks slow.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see what y'all are saying about the lighting. Not the greatest, but also it's a rocket launch. We can't complain.
One of the biggest upsides about these conditions for light is you can underexpose and get a lot of detail in the exhaust plume, and I think both of us did that pretty well today, and hopefully we can see that in my replay coming up soon.
Right. Yep, and there's the start of the vapor cone, and it just keeps coming back. Oh, yeah. That is so cool.
It is.
So yeah, that is the sign, as Max was mentioning, that the vehicle is going transonic. So some bits of air are starting to go supersonic, which is causing that pressure wave to build up and then vaporizing the or creating the condensation ahead of it. I see some people in chat wondering about the ice that we saw on stage 2. No, that was completely nominal. That was
Yeah.
not a repeat of previous missions. Thankfully, that's just little chunks of ice falling off is completely normal.
Yeah, and there's also the bleed valve, the liquid oxygen bleed valve. It's essentially this little pipe that sticks out of the engine and releases gaseous oxygen, and that eventually turns into solid sometimes and deposits some of that solid oxygen on the engine. But that's normal. This is from one of our robots. I think that's only static. There you go. Bye, Falcon 9. Bye.
Man, D has posted their footage in the back channel, and this is awesome. Make sure you stick around for it. Here's another one of our robot shots. This is with auto track, I believe. Starting to see the vehicle pitch down range. Very cool to see, as always.
Yeah, just to make sure I make this point across. I've watched more than 300 Falcon 9 launches, and that was a nominal, and I say nominal for a reason. Nominal behavior of the eyes. And look at that vapor cone. Oh my gosh. when I actually saw the anomalous behavior on the Starlink 9.3 mission, I actually went to social media and I posted that and I said, I've watched more than 300 Falcon 9 launches. I have never seen this. This is completely abnormal. And then afterwards, a couple of hours later, we knew that it was indeed a failure. So yeah, I can tell you.
Yeah. Let's see. Peter is wondering, are the fairings equipped with parachutes for a soft water landing? Yes, each one has a parachute that gets deployed to slowly take it down to the ocean surface. Right, the mass of the fairings is so small, and the area is so big that they kind of have, um, just through reentry until that parachute deploy, there's not really that much heating and they're getting slowed down pretty quickly. But then just for that last little bits, they don't hit at terminal velocity. There is that parachute,
Mhm.
which brings them down very slowly. Like we mentioned earlier, the fairing halves don't splash down in the ocean until about T plus 45 minutes.
Yeah, it takes a long time. I remember when they used to do the catches, right? And people were already asking about the outcome of the catch, like 2 or 3 minutes after fairing deployment. It's like it doesn't take that short of a time for them to come down. They actually take long time to be able to come down.
Yeah. Man, the catches were so cool and so not good.
I'm so glad they're doing now the splashing downs because it's obviously working, right? Is this
Yeah, what I
Max?
think,
Kind of looks a different track, right? Yeah,
yeah, I believe
Max.
this is Max's can.
Ooh, it has audio, I believe.
Ooh. Um,
Where's
just
the
wanted
audio?
to mention real quickly, apparently, some people had an ad during landing. We have all of those off. That's just YouTube placing one there. So if you got one,
Ooh, there it
our
is.
apologies.
Oh, I can hear the VAV.
Yeah, there was a bit of the VAB squeal there, and then just really good audio. Very cool. Um, let's see. What is that? Oh yeah, Toby's wondering what is that white vapor trail that only appears after max Q? That's just uh it's like what you see sometimes when aircraft are flying. The condensation
The contrail,
and
yeah.
yeah, the contrail just sticks around for a little bit depending on atmospheric conditions. So sometimes it's early in flight, sometimes it's late. It's purely atmospheric dependent.
It's funny how with a tower you cannot really like. Obviously, if you know that there's a storm back there, you can tell. But if you don't really know that there's a storm back there, you wouldn't be able to tell because it's like almost at the same location. You can see a little bit of it sticking out, but other than that, it's it's really funny when it's vertical and you cannot see the storm back.
Yeah. It's definitely still a little weird seeing Slick 40 with a crew access tower, which should be
Soon to be
used.
used.
Yeah, I was gonna say soon to be used on Crew 9. That mission is now going from 40.
September 24th. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Polaris Dawn no longer going to go from Slick 40. That has been moved to 39A. Um, anyway, that's going to do it for us today for this mission. Unfortunately, was not a double header, but we will of course be live for Starlink Group 10-7 tomorrow morning, which is 7:21 local time. So 5 in the morning for me. How exciting! Anyway, thank you everyone for joining today. Alex, thank you very much for being on as always.
It's been a pleasure as usual. And you know that Stromberg is going up. Well, it went up because they have another launch in just 4 days, or maybe 5. We'll see. With a Worldview Legion 3 and 4 satellites, those are going to be going to low Earth orbit. They are very light satellites, which means we're going to get another RTLS. So expect sonic
Very
booms
exciting.
on the Space Coast in just a few days from now.
Yeah. And being there to enjoy the sonic booms when that mission happens will be D. D, thank you very much for all of your footage and everything today. And of course, your slow-mo will be showed in our outro.
Always happy to be here. It ended up being a good launch, even though it wasn't a double header. We got really great sound, so always happy to be here, and thanks everyone for hanging out with us.
Yeah. And then Max, thank you for tracking and commentary and all of the Max things.
It's a pleasure as always, everybody, and thank you very much, especially if you're in the U.S. for waking up early to come out and hang out with us for a morning launch. So we will hopefully see you bright and early back again tomorrow morning.
Indeed. And I have been your host for today's mission. I'm Trevor Sesnick. And then in the background, I forgot to mention him, Carson, was operating today's stream. So make sure you say thank you to Carson. That's going to do it for us. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy Dee's awesome footage.
And here we go.
We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside SPD off. Say again, SPD off. Off. It's orange! 145! Oh my god! Oh my god! Decollage. Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?